Welcome everyone to today's Norms and Behavioral Change talk. It's the first one that we're hosting this year, so we're very happy to have all of you join us. Very quickly, just to share the agenda that we have for today, we're going to start with a quick welcome. My name is Samira. I'm the Managing Director of the Center for Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics at Penn. After this quick welcome, we will go ahead and get started with the two talks that we have for you today. The first one of which is going to be by an early career researcher, Amanda Mears from the University of Freiburg, followed by a longer talk by Dr. Uri Hertz from the University of Haifa. And after both of these talks, we're going to have about 15 minutes for Q&A towards the end of today's session. Just for those of you who might be new to the center and our program, so this series is hosted by the Penn Center for Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics. We work in partnership with the Penn PPE program, which is the Philosophy, Politics, and Economics program, and also in partnership with the Penn Masters of Behavioral and Decision Sciences program. And the center itself is a research center which works with institutions throughout the world that, particularly in the areas of research, consulting, and training services, on projects that seek to enact some sort of positive behavioral change. In terms of our series this year, this is just so that you have an overview of the 9 upcoming talks that we have through the end of this year. You can use this QR code at the right-hand side to be able to register for upcoming talks. And also something that we added very quickly here at the bottom, and something that will be open to the public, is a day-long workshop on the social dimensions of poverty, which will take place on February 14th. Further details on this will be shared by email. So if you visit our website, you'll be able to sign up for our mailing list as well, and we'll share more. With that, just a couple of notes as we get started. As the speakers are presenting, please kindly mute yourself. We would love for you to keep your camera on so that we can have a more interactive dialogue and conversation. And last but not least, for any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat at any time, or when we have the Q&A at the end, you are welcome to raise your hand. And of course, the recordings of these sessions will be posted on our website at the following link. So with that, we can turn to our first speaker for today, Amanda Mears. To introduce Amanda, so Amanda is a PhD student at the University of Freiburg and a research associate of the Walter Eucken Institute in Freiburg, Germany. Currently, she's completing her dissertation in experimental and behavioral economics with a focus on social norms, tax complexity, and tax compliance. And Amanda, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, that would be great. And as you do that, I'll share with everyone that Amanda's talk today is on sanctions and social norms. And with that, we turn it over to you, Amanda, and thank you so much for joining us. I think you're just muted at the moment. Oh, 1 second. Amanda, I think you are still muted. If you just want to, yeah.
Now you should be able to see my slides.
Yeah, we can see you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I'm having trouble even though we tested it before. So there. This should be working. So hi, sorry for the technical difficulties. My name is Amanda Mears. I'm a PhD student at the University of Freiburg, and today I will be presenting a project that I'm doing together with Professor Dr. Sarah Necker and Matthias Kasper on sanctions and social norms. And what we are looking at is, what we are trying to study in our study is the effect of laws on social norms. And this is interesting because typically laws and social norms co-evolve. So on one hand, we have norms that precede the law and leads to its creation, but then law is also seen as having an expressive function where it can affect behavior not only by altering material payoffs, but also by influencing social norms. And therefore, it's quite challenging to observe a causal effect of laws on social norms. But there was this amazing study published by Lane and colleagues in the AER in the year before last that actually showed that laws can introduce discontinuities in social esteem between legal and illegal behaviors. In contrast, we base our study on this study, but in contrast, we focus on the ability of sanctions to introduce discontinuities in social esteem. And we investigate whether legal sanctions have expressive power and influence social norms. And so this is our research question. Do sanctions and fines have an expressive power? And our research design is closely related to that of Lane et al. And we conduct an online experiment with a representative German sample. And participants are shown several scenarios describing the illegal behavior of another person. And thresholds regulate the sanction that the person faces in each scenario. And between subjects, we vary whether and by how much the person crosses the threshold. And we measure personal and social norms for each scenario using the Krupka-Weber method, so it's incentivized. And additionally, subjects are shown filler vignettes to reduce experimenter demand effects. And this whole design is based on two crucial assumptions. And the first is that absent the thresholds and sanctions, norms would not differ for arbitrary close behaviors, and that thresholds and sanctions do not correspond with thresholds and externalities. So just as an example, this is one of the situations we are looking at. We are looking at speeding behavior that is illegal past 130 kilometers an hour speed. And this, in our vignette, we describe a woman that drives at a specific speed. So either one participant might see that the woman is driving at 139 kilometers per hour. Other participant might see that this woman is driving 141 kilometers per hour. And she is aware that if she speeds up into below 140 kilometers per hour, she will be fined 20 euros. But if she speeds at a speed or drives at a speed over 140 kilometers an hour, she will be fined 40 euros. And so, as you can see, there's a threshold, a sanction in the threshold, and the sanction that this woman receives is dependent on what side her behavior is of this threshold. And then we ask her, first of all, or we ask participants, first of all, how appropriate do you find this woman's behavior? So this is the first order beliefs. And then secondly, we tell them that all participants were asked, how appropriate do you find the woman's behavior? What do you think was the most common answer to this question? So this is the Krupka-Weber question that allows us to incentivize our experiment. And there's 4 possible answers ranging from very appropriate to very inappropriate. And these are the 10 situations or the 10 vignettes that participants are asked to evaluate. And they all describe illegal behaviors where the behavior or the sanction that the person receives is dependent on a threshold. So we have tax evasion, we have speeding, that I showed in the previous example. We have driving a certain distance from another person. We have the possession of cocaine. We have theft, or we have abortion, which is illegal in Germany, and we have the late payment of taxes. And so for our pilot study, and this is the results that I will be sharing today, so comments are more than welcome. We're still in the design phase. For the pilot study, we only looked at the behavior below and above the threshold. So treatments 4 and 5. And this is the structure of our experiment. We first, as you can see, a very small sample of 106 participants. We first ask sociodemographics. We then have our vignette experiment that is between subjects, as I explained previously. And then we have a follow-up where we ask participants to evaluate the previous scenarios. So they get shown the exact same treatment vignettes as before, and then we ask them to evaluate them. And finally, we ask some general questions about sanctioning and attitudes towards sanctioning. And here are results. So on the y-axis, you see the acceptability ratings ranging from 1 to -1, 1 being very acceptable, -1 being very unacceptable. And for each graph shows a different scenario. And as I said, in the pilot, we only looked at the behavior below the threshold and the direct behavior above the threshold, the red bar being the behavior below the threshold and the blue bar being the behavior above the threshold. And as you can see, once again, it's a small sample, we see some jumps in the speeding scenario, a jump in the distance scenario, and the tax declaration and theft and abortion scenario. These aren't significant, but once again, it's very small sample sizes. This is, first of all, the personal norms. And for the social norms, we see similar patterns. Once again, we see a jump. So this is, we find this as to be very encouraging because we do see a jump in certain scenarios, although we would like to fine tune it in a second pilot, maybe focusing on other scenarios. So feedback on that would be really great. So as I said, we have a second block where participants are asked to evaluate the scenarios. And this part of the study is basically to kind of tease out what are the moderators for the social acceptability ratings. So we ask participants to which extent do they agree that the more one violates this rule, the greater the damage for others or nature. So focusing on externalities, we ask whether they think the person in the situation can control to what extent they violate the rule. We ask whether the authorities can determine exactly to what extent this rule is violated, focusing on measurability. We also ask whether they agree that the person's behavior is morally right. And we also ask about tolerance, whether one violates the rule more, this would lead to a greater penalty. And in the study of Lane et al., they focused, I think, on intention, on tolerance and measurability, and our extensions are the externality and morality. And here what we see, once again, it's just means, and we see that participants agree that intention, measurability, and tolerance play a role in the social actions of the people in the vignettes. And lo and behold, illegal behavior is sometimes considered immoral, except for the case of abortion and tax declaration and speeding. People seem to be, there's an indifference there. Finally, in the final block, we asked what affects social acceptability. So whether a rule violation is fined or not reflects whether a rule violation is socially accepted, whether the magnitude of fines reflect how socially accepted the rule violation is, and whether a rule violation is punished with a prison sentence reflects how socially accepted the rule violation is, and whether the administration has discretion in determining fines reflects how socially accepted the rule violation is. And here we see that discretion might affect social acceptability and less so fines, the magnitude of fines and prison sentences. Once again, keeping in mind that this is an extremely small sample. Yeah, this is our study, and thank you so much for your attention and for this opportunity.
Great, thank you so much, Amanda. And I was going to say you're welcome to, if you want to place even your email address in the chat, if folks want to reach out directly to you with any feedback. Everyone, just a reminder that if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. If it's for Amanda, we can come to it later when we have our Q&A. So we can turn with that to our next speaker, Dr. Uri Hertz. So Uri is a visiting scholar at Penn's MBDS program, or the Masters of Behavioral and Decision Sciences program. And he's also a senior lecturer at the Department of Cognitive Sciences at the University of Haifa, where he is the head of the Social Decisions Lab. Maybe I can stop sharing so that Uri, you can share your screen. And as you do that, I'll share with folks that Uri studies how human and AI agents learn from each other, share information, and make decisions together, and how these support collective behaviors such as social norms and social structure. And with that, Uri, I'll hand it over to you. I think you're just muted at the moment, so if you want to unmute, that'd be great. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Oh, great. You all can hear me.
Yeah.
Good. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present my work. And thank you, Amanda, for a very interesting work. So I'm very much interested in sanctioning and norms as well. But this is a very different talk. So as Samira said, I'm coming from the University of Haifa. I'm a visiting scholar. I'm staying at Penn this year. My lab, we work on a lot of different projects. Today, I'm going to present works carried by Lior Gazit, who is a PhD student in the lab, in collaboration with Ofer Arazi from the Information Systems Department. And I'll just give some brief introduction about other things that I'm interested in the lab. So I'm interested in social decision-making and collective behavior, and the question of how people make decisions and behave in an interactive, dynamic social environment. And this entails understanding the physical and social environment in which people operate, how cognitive agents perceive this environment, how they make decisions, and change this environment, and how these decisions kind of scale up when you think about multiple agents that operate in this environment to form collective decisions. We work on different topics on adaptive empathy, advice giving, information sharing, which is what I'll be discussing a bit today, models of learning and decision making and affect. I have a number of studies looking at social, cognitive, and ecological systems, so complex view of this kind of interaction systems and moral decision making. If you want to hear about some other projects that we run in the lab, I'll be presenting in the social psychology meeting in 2 weeks on February 5th about multiplayer games and learning mechanisms underlying social norms, intergroup bias, and social categories. This is something that I presented here last year. And if you really want to know more, I'm giving 2 courses, which we still have spaces for. One of them is the AI and human behavior. The other one is the social decision seminar, part of the MBDS program. So now to the main topic of today. So in this project, what we were interested in, and what I'm kind of interested in this point is, where do AI agents, and specifically AI advisors, fit in our social world? And we know that in our social environment, we have lots of interactions with different people. Some of these interactions relate to sharing information, so learning from each other. We can observe what other people are doing. We can give advice to people. We can learn from their advice and update our beliefs. So this social learning is prevalent in our society. But our previous work in a lab focused mostly on human advice giving and advice taking, and showed that a lot of different factors affect the likelihood to accept or to comply with advice. So here, for example, we simply looked at the differences between complying with advice and complying with observation. So we had participants learning in a learning task. They need to learn which lake is better, so more likely to give them lots of fish. And in the middle of the experiment, they get to either get an advice from another player, or they can observe another player's behavior. Always this kind of advice and observation were always accurate. And what we saw was that participants were more likely to comply with advice compared to observation. We can see it here. We can see it already here. And the advice had better long-term, longer, more sustained effect over time. So they were more likely to comply with the advice even throughout the learning period. And they were much quicker to comply with advice compared to observation. And these findings indicate that advice is different from observation with a number of reasons. One of them is that advisors have some kind of intentionality of sharing information. We trust them, or they're accountable for their advice, so we can they may incur some reputational cost if they make the wrong advice. And people tend to trust advice more than observation. In a different study, we looked at how what affect people when they share information or give advice to other. And here what we saw is that indeed when people, here we see when they share information as advice, it is more likely to be accurate. And decisions that they decided not to share with others are over here in black, are less likely to be accurate or less likely to be correct. So it means that advice is indeed privileged in the sense that people are kind of filtering or making sure that what they share is accurate. However, there are other factors shaping it. For example, if advice is very costly, they are less likely to give it. If there is potential for reputational gain, there's an increase in the likelihood to give advice. And if people are kind of affected by more responsible for their advice, so we did some kind of responsibility and accountability manipulation, they're also slightly more worried about their advice, and they are much better at kind of giving advice only when it's really accurate. And these findings indicate that social interactions are not just about specifically giving advice, it's not just about sharing information with other in kind of the best information or just increased accuracy. It's also about the relationship that we have between the receiver and the advisor. So things like trust and reciprocity, responsibility and accountability, or the likelihood to gain influence and reputation, all affect our behavior in this kind of tasks. And it means that we care about the entire package, like long-term relationships that we have, and not just like transferring bits of information. And at this point, Lior joined, and he was interested in what are the implications of what's going to happen when we look at algorithmic advisors, when we think about these new AI agents that can also provide some advice. And the first thing that Lior was doing was looking at the effect of responsibility sharing. So responsibility sharing is, we know in human collective decisions that one reason to make decisions with others is to gain more information, and therefore which will more likely to lead to positive outcome. But another kind of thing that pushes people to make decisions with others is this kind of sharing responsibility or sharing the adverse, like the negative responses when we make a mistake. So just anticipating negative outcome. But this is something that is uniquely to human. Like, it's not to do with the specific advice at hand, but it's again like something that we can do with other humans. And we're wondering whether this thing will affect participants' preferences on sharing if they prefer to get human or algorithmic advisor. So in the task that Lior had designed, we used participants had to make some prediction decisions about two domains. This was either a financial domain, predicting the kind of investment outcomes, or in a medical domain. And they see it as problems. They have access to this. We ask them, we tell them there are going to be two advisors. One of them is a human advisor, another one is algorithmic advisor. We tell them that they're both kind of have very similar description and as their expertise. They rate their advisors on a number of parameters, and then they make a decision which advisor they want to get, human or algorithmic advisor. And we had one manipulation, and the manipulation was that in half of the participants signed a no responsibility disclaimer, where they signed that they know that the advisor has no responsibility over the outcome. And we then looked at the participants' responses, and what we found was that the ratings that participants gave for trustworthiness, which includes competence, benevolence, and integrity of the advisors, were not affected by the manipulation. So the manipulation is the dark colors, and the browns, oranges are algorithms, and the blue, light blue are human advisors. And we can see that participants rated human advisors as more competent and more trustworthy than algorithms in both cases. It was more pronounced in the medical domain. But we see that the manipulation did not have any effect on trustworthiness, which kind of makes sense. And then we looked at the responsibility ratings, and what we found was that responsibility manipulation had the biggest effect on human advisors rating. So for algorithms, algorithmic advisors, participants already kind of did not think that they had lots of responsibility, and therefore the manipulation did not change their responsibility ratings too much. So it means that the way they evaluate different advisors is already different from the outset. So humans are seen not just as trustworthy, but also as accountable or have some kind of responsibility, whereas algorithms are not considered to have this kind of out of like any benefit beyond the decision that has to be made right now, beyond just getting the most accurate. And when we looked at preferences, we saw that the preference between participants all generally preferred a human over algorithmic advisors. This was greatly affected by trustworthiness measures, but also by responsibility, just like we saw. But we didn't see a big effect of the manipulation in this case. But in general, what we saw was that participants, when they choose advisors, they care about the task at hand, but they also care about what's going to happen afterwards, about the things that are about their social relationship, not just at this kind of specific interaction. And this have a lot of implication for interacting or preferences for algorithmic advisors. And this kind of led us to the next project, which we thought about, which was more about this kind of relationship in slightly different domain. So we know that, again, like going back to our non-AI environment, people care a lot about relationships, but not all relationships are the same. So we have different types of people in our lives, and we expect and behave differently around them. So we have friends, and we have differently near our parents or interacting with them. We have different expectations from our managers and our bosses, or from our professors or our students, or the plumber, a lawyer, a bus driver, or a stranger. So each one, we have some interaction with them. Sometimes it's professional, sometimes it's more personal, more intimate, but each one has different kind of we have different expectations and we behave slightly differently. And this is been studied by Alan Fizdal, but also these are nice works by from Molly Crockett's lab, showing that they did this survey and they looked at characterize different relationships using these factors of care, hierarchy, mating, and reciprocity. And you can see clearly that people have different expectations from their parents, for example. So they have like high care rating for parents, but from their boss, it's somewhere in the middle, like they don't expect it that much. But in terms of hierarchy, they are pretty similar, parents and bosses. Siblings, we don't expect them to show a lot of hierarchy, but they care about us. We looked at the reciprocity effects and so on. So different relationships entail different expectations. And this was shown in other studies as well. So this is from the previous NoBeC seminar by Maurice Schweitzer, showing this really nice work on that people expect leaders or boss or people like this to show more integrity in their results, which means they need to be impartial in their decisions toward different people. So when they have a social decision allocating money, for example, or something like this, we expect leaders to be impartial, but friends and allies, we expect them to treat us differently than others. So to show this kind of benevolence effect where they're more likely to prefer us over strangers. And this is, again, a different work from Lian Yang's lab, where they show that in this kind of the people that prefer strangers over kin or family are judged more harshly than people that prefer kin over strangers, so prefer family over strangers. This is in a money allocation problem. So the types of relationships that we have are kind of shape our expectation about their social behavior, about how they're going to treat us, or how they're going to balance between our outcomes or our interests and other people's, strangers' interests. And this line of studies kind of led us to the idea that maybe one way to think about how people perceive algorithms in their lives in terms of relationship will be to ask what people expect from algorithms, so how they expect algorithmic agents to behave, and then inferring what type of relationship this expectation kind of fit. And yeah, so this is the main idea. So the idea is that if we ask people what they expect an algorithm will advise them, this will tell us a bit about what they think about this algorithm. Is it their friend or someone else? So in the task that we designed, we focused on social dilemmas, where specifically money allocation problem, but this is a nice example of them. So this is where we have the last cookie on the plate, and we can either get it ourselves and eat it and have the last one, or we can leave it there for someone else, for a friend or a stranger or someone else to get. So we can consider our own kind of self-interest or consider other people's interests as well in our decision. And there's clearly no answer for it, but this was the kind of problem that we had in mind. And the way we ran the actual experiment is instead of cookies, which we probably should have used, we used these money allocation problems. So we have this 18 set of different questions. So these were 18, they repeated from time to time, where people need to choose between two bundles, one of them the A and B. Each one includes some money or some points that you receive and some points that the other person receives. And in this case, I can get 60 points and the other person 30 from option A, or I can get 50 points and the other person gets 80 points from option B. And this problem is located in this kind of grid of the difference between A and B in terms of money points for self and points for others. It's located over here, which means that there is slight benefit on choosing A for me, but the other person loses a lot from option A. And we have other problems are aligned on this grid. And in this experiment, participants, the reward they collected for themselves determined their own bonus at the end of the experiment, and the points that they allocated to the other person determined the bonus that another person in the game was getting that they didn't know, but they were randomly assigned with another person. And they also received some bonus based on other people's behavior. So these were all kind of real decisions of money allocation, and they all got their bonuses based on them. So yeah, so these were the problems that first of all, they just needed to make the decisions. And then, and the nice thing about this design is that you can then fit for each participant's decision this very simple kind of decision rule, where the decision that participants make is governed by some bias that they have towards A or B. Usually it's supposed to be 0, but also relies on this factor alpha here, which is the weight given to the other person's points or allocation. So essentially the decision is to do with how much I care about, like how, what is the difference between option A and option B in terms of reward for myself, plus this alpha factor multiplied by the difference for the other person. And when this alpha is 0, it means that I just don't care at all about the other person. And what we expect to see is this kind of pattern over here, where I always choose A when A is better for me, and I always choose B when B is better for me. So I don't choose A when A is not good for me. And I don't care at all about the other person. But when alpha is 1, it means that the other person's reward is exactly the same as mine. And in this case, if I may lose a bit, so it's not that option A is not that good for me, but it's very good for the other person, I will choose option A. And this is the other way around. If option B is good for the other person and it's not good for me, I'm going to choose option B. And we expect to see this diagonal line, which tells us that alpha is positive and is close to 1. So this is alpha parameter. If it's 0, it's selfish. If it's below 0, it's actually a bit competitive. But if it's positive, the bigger it is or the higher it is, the more pro-social I am, or the more I take into account the other person's decision rewards. Good. Yeah, so I cannot see the chat if there's any questions. I'll open it here on the side.
Uri, I was gonna say, so I don't see any questions just as of yet, but yeah, let everyone know if you want to
Yeah.
let
So
yeah.
I think that I was talking a lot. So yeah, if you have any questions about these technical parts, yeah, go ahead and ask, and I try to see the chat, and yeah, I think that I can also see people around here. Okay. So in our task, going back to our task, we asked whether people, first of all, participants just had to make their decisions, just like before, like people did in a lot of different experiments before us. But what we did in addition, or what we are actually focusing on about, is we asked participants to, in each problem that they observe, to tell us what they think a human advisor will advise them, which option, A or B, and which option they think an algorithmic advisor would advise them, A or B. So we asked them, what do you expect them to say? I take them. So for example, here in the cookie, what do you think? Do you think that a human advisor or an algorithm, are they going to tell you to take the last cookie or leave it to someone else? So let's just, like, you don't have to say if you don't want to, but think for a bit. What do you think, like, would a human advisor would advise you, like someone, your friend, or yeah, one of your friends is next to you, or is it going to tell you, or your parents is going to tell you, take the last cookie or leave it for other people? And what do you think, like an algorithm, if you just like had an algorithm giving you some advice, do you think that the advice would be to take the cookie for yourself or leave it for someone else? So like you can just like give it some thought. This was our kind of, we were not so sure. So there are interesting kind of directions that this kind of task may go. But lucky for us, it was the same, like it replicated, like it was the same all the time. And what we found was that participants generally thought that humans are going to tell them to take the cookie, and algorithms will tell them to leave the cookie to someone else. So this is how it was shown to the participants. We told them what would a human advisor would recommend and what would an algorithm advisor would recommend. And what we saw was that these are the results over here. This is the model fit for the algorithm and the human. And we see that generally speaking, they thought that humans advisor will not care that much about the other person, so almost not at all. And we see this kind of, and we always kind of care only about how much you can get. So essentially telling you to always take this kind of selfish or individualistic decision. Whereas algorithms had this kind of diagonal. It's not completely prosocial, but they do take into account other people's outcome. For example, here, they're more likely to tell you that to take the option that benefits the other person very much, and you don't incur a lot of like loss in this case. So they are giving somewhat positive alpha. So essentially, this is the main finding from this initial task. We see here the alpha parameter. We can see it positive for algorithm, as it's almost 0 for humans. We also asked participants other questions about the perceived consistency and the impartiality of the advisor. And there as well, algorithms were rated to show higher consistency, higher impartiality in there. Like people expect them to be impartial, to be very consistent, to give advice the same regardless of the other person identity and so on. Where the humans were rated slightly lower, and people thought that they are going to be changed from time to time. They are much more context dependent, and they are much more show differential treatment of other people. So these kinds of tell us that in this kind of benevolence integrity balance that we saw before, humans are more in the side of benevolence, human advisors, where algorithmic advisors are more in the side of integrity, which is more in line with, and humans are more similar to what we expect from friends, whereas algorithms are expected to behave as if they are kind of a leader or a manager or someone associated with some institutional or platform-related identity. So they're not exactly our friends. And we were, again, like we were a bit surprised. This could be the other way around, but this seems to be very consistent. And this was the first result that we got. So people kind of expect algorithms to be more more pro-social in a sense, or more impartial. And we were then thought that it would be interesting to think about different types of algorithms. So we know that this is something that we're kind of experiencing right now. People have access to different types of algorithms, and more like in bigger variety than ever before. And we have, for example, I think most of us are kind of familiar or have access to algorithmic recommendation in specific apps that they're using, like applications. So this could be like your bank, the application of your bank, where you kind of get a message or recommendation how to invest your money and so on. So this will be like a chatbot, but it has a clear indication this is a representative of the organization. Netflix, Spotify, all these platforms have recommender systems that kind of automatically gives you some recommendations. So they're always part of the application, part of the same platform, or part of the same institute. But we have more and more AI agents that are personal assistants, that they are more general, so they are not affiliated with a specific organization. So for example, if you use ChatGPT or Gemini or something like this, even though the ChatGPT belongs to OpenAI, I can ask it questions or advice about my finances, medical advice, social behavior, and so on. And it's not clear that it's immediately part of this kind of institution. So it's something that I install on my own. It's a third party. So it's slightly different than this original one. And we also have this new kind of AI companions and AI assistants. They're supposed to be tailored to us. Some of them look and behave or interact as if they are our friends. So the language that they use is very different, and the visual appearance is very different. So these are kind of new agents. They are algorithmic, but they are different than the ones we usually had before. So they are independent. They are not affiliated with a specific place. We have a bit more control about using them. We chose them. It's not like that we can choose like different advisors in the different applications, so in Spotify or something like this. And this entails a slightly different kind of relationship, which is something that is new. It's still evolving, but I find it very interesting. And our follow-up experiment was trying to see whether the effects that we saw before are really because people think about humans as friends and algorithms as maybe kind of this institutional or platform-related advisors. And maybe we can push people to think about algorithms in a similar way as friends or personal advisors. So in this follow-up experiment, we did follow the exact same experiment, but this time participants in two different groups had to make estimations about algorithmic and human advisors, but once about advisors that are associated with the platform. So this was in the prolific experimental platform. So they know that these are algorithms or human advisors that are coming from are employed by the prolific experiment platform. Or we asked them to think about what they think would a human or algorithmic advisor, that are personal advisors, would advise. These are kind of this ChatGPT or something like this, or what would your friends suggest in this case. So we ran the same exact experiment. The only difference is this kind of affiliation, whether it's institutional or platform or personal. And what we saw, this is the alpha parameters, and 0 or below is very individualistic, and the higher it is, it's more pro-social. And what we saw was that when people think about humans that represent the prolific platform, they thought that they're going to be impartial. When they think about humans as their personal friend, they thought they're going to be much more individualistic. They're telling them to take the last cookie. And this is in line with what we saw before in human advisors, in human expectations from humans to be either impartial or to take your point, the difference between benevolence and integrity. For algorithms, we saw a similar effect, but it was smaller. So we saw that algorithms that were associated with the platform were rated as more pro-social or more impartial, and algorithms that were personal algorithms were less impersonal. They're less impartial, yeah. But they never were similar to the to the person itself, to the human advisor. So personal friend was always more likely to take your side or care more about you than personal algorithmic advisors, which still kind of represent some kind of authority or more indifferent. The same thing was observed in the consistency, so it's not that clear over here, but algorithms were always rated as more consistent and impartial than humans, but slightly less so in the personal compared to the institutional condition. But it's not a huge effect. And what it shows us is that, in a sense, there's a big difference. So the relational norms do show an effect. So we care a lot about whether this person is the advisor is affiliated with us or with an institution. And algorithms can change, so they can vary in their the types of relationships that they have, but it's not, but to some kind of limit. So currently, at least the current experience that people have with them, they are never really our friends in a sense. It could change, but it's still out there. So this is what I said. Affiliation was very important, but there was some limit to it. AI is always expected to be more consistent and show greater integrity than humans. And again, AI is not our friend yet. And one kind of outcome that we get from this experiment is that it is important to think about these algorithmic agents as representing different types of relationship with us and trying to understand what kind of relationship we have with them. So affiliation is only one aspect, and this pro-social decisions is only one type of decision, but we can think about a lot of other things. For example, what kind of decisions we trust AI agents to make, which could be different from like an AI agent, which is a representative of kind of financial organization, or AI agent that is my personal advisor or assistant. What kind of information I want to disclose with this AI agent, what I want to withhold, how do I manage my impression with these kind of AI agents if I know that they are part of going to be monitored or part of some kind of other organization compared to more personal or friend-like AI agents. So these are all things that we need to probe and see how much we can change them. And an interesting question is how much, what kind of changes we can make to these AI agents to make them more friend-like, more teacher-like, more parent-like, and so on. So this will be very interesting for future development. One last thing that I'd be happy to share is this question of compliance that we started to work on. Oops. Yeah. So I see some. Yeah, I have some questions. Okay. So I have some questions. I didn't see them yet, but now I can. It's a good time to stop and answer. Yeah. So some questions about the manipulation. So we did not manipulate. We changed only human as we told them it was going to be a friend or not, or prolific. This was experiment two. We never had like it's not clear so in this experiment, participants never knew what was going to be the advice given by the algorithm or by the human. And again, advice in this case could be either way. So it could be like be very selfish or the other way around, depends on how you program these experiments. And it's exactly the follow-up experiment where we actually had participants observing advice that we manipulated from human and algorithms. So maybe I'll share this. And yeah, I think that it's a good question about what kind of advice it's going to be, especially because if relationships are important, the advice that we expect, like the type of advice that we may expect or comply with from friends or from experts and from teachers and from someone else, is going to be dependent on the kind of relationship and the expertise that they have. So again, this could definitely be the case that manipulating the domain of the advice will greatly shape participants' expectations and compliance. So I have some time and I want to maybe go over quickly one last experiment. And this is something that is still ongoing, so we're still in the middle. We have some data, but we're still kind of considering the follow-up experiments. And in this project, we were interested in the same kind of social dilemma, but now we were interested in compliance. So what happens if I get the advice to take the last cookie or get the advice to leave it for someone else? Am I going to comply with this advice no matter what they are? And do I care about the identity of the advisor? And in this case, in this experiment, we use a slightly different paradigm. We use the SVO, the social value orientation paradigm. It's pretty similar in a sense. You answer a number of questions of like choosing between different money allocations or bundles of allocations for you and for another person. This time you have to choose 1 out of 8, out of 9. And for example, in these experiments, participants observed the question, and then they received an advice from an advisor. For example, here we have an algorithmic advisor recommends choosing option A, 85 to you and 85 to the other participant. The other options we can see, it will always get 85 in this question, but you can also, like the other person can get like you will get 85 and they get 15. This is the equal option. It's the best option here. But there were some other questions. For example, you get 100 and the other person get 50, or you both get 85, or you get 100, they get 50, or you get 50 and the other get 100. So there are lots of different varieties here. And Lior pre-programmed the advice. So we had 4 different groups. Each group got 1 advisor. This could be either human or algorithmic advisor. And the advice that they gave was either altruistic, so always kind of giving equal or preferring the outcome for the other person, or individualistic, caring only about your own outcome. So always get the best for yourself. And so this time, we pre-programmed the algorithm and the human to give this advice. And what we were interested in was compliance. So it's different from these kind of expectations that people have. Now we are in charge of this. And in this case, what we saw was that participants were much more likely to comply with or much more affected by algorithms compared to humans. So we saw that algorithmic advice, when the human and the algorithm gave altruistic advice, SVO for algorithm was, the participants' choices were more pro-social, this over here. And in the individualistic condition, participants' choices were more individualistic or less pro-social when they got advice from an algorithm compared to human advice. So no matter what type of advice we gave them, even though what we saw before, they expect algorithms to be more altruistic and human to be more individualistic, here, once they got the advice, they listened more, or they were more likely to comply with algorithms compared to human advisors, giving the exact same advice. Which is, again, like somewhat puzzling in this case. So we're still trying to understand. There's a number of kind of alternative explanations that could explain this pattern of behavior. One of them is that people just are more likely to follow algorithms' advice no matter what. It could be that maybe they think that in this case, it's a more kind of, game theoretic solution to this problem. So algorithms have some kind of edge. It's not that clear. But it also could be that they assume that the relationship that they have with humans or relationship that they have with algorithms are slightly different, that they are more likely to comply with algorithms that represent some kind of institutional advice that is probably more knowledgeable or have some privilege compared to a friend, which is a bit more idiosyncratic. And one direction that we're really interested in is thinking about what kind of knowledge algorithms have that humans don't have, that compared to humans or compared to friends. And specifically in social domains, where their algorithms are more likely to represent descriptive norm, because algorithms get information from observing a lot of people or kind of gathering a lot of data. Maybe what they tell us is the descriptive norm in this experiment, what most people are doing, but the humans are more likely to give us their opinion or what they should be doing, which is a bit more idiosyncratic. So everyone is going to be slightly more different. As we saw before, human advisors are perceived to be less consistent in these kind of social dilemmas. So specifically in social dilemmas, maybe algorithmic advice is seen as representing kind of descriptive norm, which may be like a very strong nudge or maybe kind of strong indicator that I should follow. This is the norm. This is what everybody are doing. I should probably do the same. If everybody, I see that the algorithm tells me to be selfish, I'm going to be selfish because this is the norm here. If it's telling me to be more pro-social, I should be more pro-social. Whether humans are a bit more idiosyncratic. So this is one hypothesis that we are currently trying to explore in follow-up experiments. And it's interesting to think about all these three kind of expectations, compliance, and preferences, whether people will even turn to algorithms and humans into advice in this kind of experiment or these kind of decisions. And thinking about them really in this kind of the thing that the answer to these kind of different questions is going to be, where do you think algorithms are in terms of where they are located in our social world? What kind of relationship we think they have? What kind of knowledge about the environment or about our cultures or about our friends we think they have? Do we think that they really know us specifically, or are they going to treat us as, generic other? And we can think about what does it mean for them? So do I think that this is a generic algorithm that's going to give the same advice to everyone, or they are actually tailored or kind of following my kind of preferences and so. So understanding them in terms of these kind of relational norms is going to be interesting to explore these directions, not just in the social dilemmas, but in other domains as well. And yeah, so this is the kind of compliance and what do we think about people saying us to take advice, leave advice, or. So again, this will be probably interesting in terms of future directions about like exploring different types of algorithms, especially the new ones that have like really kind of we have a lot of experience chatting with them. We already they have some kind of personality. We have some shared memory, so they kind of remember, tailored to us, compared to these kind of old ones that are a bit more generic. This is the, Amazon's algorithm telling us what to buy. Thinking about managers and kind of algorithmic management in places like Uber and kind of lots of other cases where they tell you what to do. So this is a different relationship that we have. And these are the old-fashioned social support systems that people may still have in mind when they think about algorithms as this kind of cold calculating machines. So this is, again, like open for a lot of different questions, which I'm currently trying to pursue with students here and elsewhere. And yeah, this is it. Thank you for listening. And I'll be very happy to chat and answer questions.
Thank you so much, Uri. And just turning to everyone in the group, I see some applause there as well. I was going to say we have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So folks, feel free to either raise your hand or put any additional questions in the chat. We turn it over to you if you have any questions for Uri or Amanda from earlier as well. And I think, so for folks who had put questions earlier in the chat, I think Uri had addressed each of them, but if you have any follow-up to that. I see a question from Flora. Flora, feel free to, if you want to unmute your mic and if you want to ask yourself, please feel free.
Sure. Thanks, Amira, and thank you so much for your lecture, Professor Hertz. It was quite interesting. I was wondering whether once we compare the AI with humans, this comparison by its own already shapes the expectations and how it fits the social world versus if it would be compared with something else that doesn't have the same attributes.
Yeah. So this is a very good question. First of all, it probably I'll stop sharing and yeah, it's one bigger. Yeah, so I think that this is first of all, it seems to shape it a bit. So when we think about them in comparison, we think of, like we put them together, we immediately think about the differences between them. I think that I'm a bit more like our second manipulation showing that when you have the affiliation, like if they're both coming from prolific, people were able to say, yeah, they're both actually going to give the same advice. And when they're both personal, we're still seeing the differences. So it means that there is kind of some dimensions where people see like a very clear contrast between humans and algorithms. In other places, it's less so. So it's probably affecting them, but not like this is not could not explain everything. And I think that it will be interesting. I think we're still kind of thinking, again, in this kind of social world, there are other things that we could compare it to. For example, we can definitely, I think that was one of the questions about like the identity of the person. So it could be whether we are comparing an algorithm to an expert or to a friend. This is especially interesting in these kind of social dilemma questions where, like, you could say, from an ethics perspective, if I have like this kind of expert philosopher, they would say A or B, and they're expert in ethics. But again, like you can think about your friend giving you another answer, and it's not that clear who is right and who is wrong or who you're going to comply. Actually, you may appreciate both inputs. And you say, yeah, I'm just happy that my friend told me to take the last cookie. I'm not going to take it, but I know that he's a good friend. So this is, again, like the advice is not just about changing your behavior. It's also about like our relationships. It's slightly different when you move to other domains where expertise is really important. So where if you want to ask about, like, I know, medical advice, if you ask your friend, what should I do? I have this kind of weird thing on my foot, compared to like going to physician, I hope that you will give more weight to the physician advice. So again, their expertise is slightly different, but also I think that even in these cases, because a lot of these kind of medical questions, financial advice, many advices is in decisions where we have a lot of uncertainty, outcome is not that clear. So there's always something about the relationship, about this accountability. People will follow the advice of like financial advice because the person giving them the advice was very nice and like, gave them some coffee when they met or something like this. So we use all these indications because we always make these kind of decisions in uncertain situations. So they're always kind of creeping back in.
Great. Thank you, Uri, and thank you, Flora, for that question. Other questions or comments, feedback from the group? Don't go all at once. Okay, we see something from Amanda. Amanda, do you want to go ahead? You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, I was just because you had the one slide that says AI is not our friend yet. And I was just thinking about the types of advice or where we might actually value integrity beyond somebody being nice. We want AI to say, don't take the cookie because we expect him or it to have the long-term effects or knowledge of the long-term effects in mind. And perhaps that's also why you see greater compliance with AI, because you just trust the integrity of this machine who's not going to tell me what I want to hear, but rather what I need to hear.
Yeah. So I think that, like, if you say we want them to be friends, I think it's a good question, like, of. I think that I definitely don't think that we want AI to be our friends, but I do think that when we think about our designing agents, we want to think about or to understand how do people perceive them. So it's important to think that to acknowledge that people have different perception of these agents, and we can tweak some aspects of them even without knowing. So this kind of affiliation thing is something that people can, like, there's a default affiliation when you run these things. And if you just, and all these kind of decisions will change the way people perceive these algorithms and what kind of information they share with them, what they ask them, and what they comply with them. It's definitely the case that it's worthwhile to think about. And it's clear that some companies are trying to create AI agents that are like our friends. And they try to make them behave and also kind of prompt them to behave like friends. And it means that if people really expect algorithms to show lots of integrity, exactly like we show in the compliance experiment, if they are not aware of this kind of manipulation, that someone is actually programming behind the curtain, making sure that the algorithm is always kind of be very kind of taking your point of view, or like this is a language model that essentially just learned how to give advice based on, you tell them, give me advice as if you were my closest friend. And this prompt is not always transparent, so we don't see it. It's behind the scene. The programmer is actually writing it. We never actually saw it. And it's giving us this kind of very selfish advice, or people ask these machines questions about relationships and stuff like this. We should be I know, aware of this kind of possibility that actually we need to consider how is it programmed, how we can make sure what is its personality, what we can expect from it. So we actually want to be, this could be used to kind of make sure that we're not over relying or over complying with these machines, even though they look like, we think that, yeah, if they tell us to dump our girlfriend, it's probably what we should be doing, but actually, no, it has no idea what's right.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Simone, go ahead, please.
That was a really interesting talk. So one question that comes to mind actually related to the question to Amanda's question. So you looked at compliance and you get an interesting result that they comply more with the AI. But I wonder if you looked also at their preference. If they had, so they say they think that the AI is going to be more integrity, less benevolent.
Yeah.
And once you get the advice, then you comply with it. But if you know that they are more, not going to be less benevolent, that's probably the advice. So would you choose that ahead of time? It's a good question, and that would be interesting, I think.
Yeah. So this is a very, very good point. We're now running a follow-up experiment using the previous, like the two options paradigm. And then we start each experiment by letting them, evaluate participants' baseline for how much, their pro-social behavior. And then we give them the advice, and we look now at change from baseline instead of the original of the task we had at hand. And we also look at kind of follow-up, like what happens when after you get the advice. So we have compliance, and now we just go back to the task and see if people keep on giving advice. So it's in a pilot stage. It seems to be that we replicate the main effect, that more compliance to humans, but it's very clear that
Humans or to AI?
So more compliance to AI compared to humans, but there is definitely an effect of baseline. So you're more likely overall to comply with advice that is already kind of aligned with what you think. It pushes you a bit to each side. We do use we use a number, or we test a number of options. Two of them are very extreme. So one of them is very altruistic. So it's like giving a lot of value to the other person, almost no value to you. And the other one is very competitive. You're always kind of telling you to actually to always just choose the option that is worse to the other person. And it seems that the compliance there is relatively low, but the effect is big because people are very different, like their baseline is very different from these two extremes. So this is where we can say, well, they don't listen to them all the time, but it does push them, like these kind of extreme manipulations pushes them away from their baseline a bit more. But we're still kind of, but this is true for all kind of advice giving in general. But we're still playing with this. But we're trying to be. I think there's an interesting question of value alignment, whether people perceive algorithms or advisors in general as aligned to their own values. And it is an interesting question whether the more different the value of this AI from me, is it going to affect my compliance as well?
Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. There's one more question in the chat. I might mispronounce your name. I think it looks like Kian. And the question is, do people prefer getting personal or character and career advice from humans versus AI machines?
So we don't know. So this is an interesting question. I think these are exactly kind of tapping into the future directions of the things that we wanted to go to. Again, like looking at different domains, different kind of questions. And again, but I think the most important question is what kind of values, or what is the type of information that you expect in each decision. And again, like if you think about career advice, who do you turn to for career advice? Do you think that you will turn to your friends, or to your parents, or to someone who's actually experiencing this kind of career? So thinking about them, first of all, in terms of relationship that you currently have. So for example, like my friends or my current boss knows a lot about my abilities and my preferences and so on. But maybe some is asking an expert who's already kind of doing this kind of job. He can tell me a lot about the inside about the job, but cannot tailor it specifically to me. So each kind of advisor has very specific and unique kind of input, and I think that this will directly affect our preferences for AI or human advisors. So this will be interesting to see how this kind of shape this behavior.
Jan, do you have anything to add to that? Any follow-up? No, you're good? Okay, great. And then I see a message from Dawn, which is directed to Amanda. So similar research being done, I think that would be a great connection to make. I think with that, unless there's any other question, I think we can go ahead and start to wrap up. I'm going to share one last slide, and just as I do that, just want to express deep, deep appreciation to both Uri and Amanda for your presentations today and for getting us started with our series this year. Let me share this last slide as we wrap up. So again, thank you, Uri and Amanda, and also to everyone who participated and for your questions, staying with us until the very end. This is just a heads up for the remainder of our series for this Norms and Behavioral Change talk series through the end of this year. We have 9 more talks, the next one of which is scheduled for Thursday, February 13th at the same time. We're going to be joined by Dr. Robert Hawkins from Stanford University, and we'll have more details sent by email. So if you're not already on our listserv, please join. You can find how to join our listserv if you go to our website and click on the Contact Us part. And one very last thing I'll mention is that we have something, a workshop on the social dimensions of poverty, which will take place on February 14th of this year. It's going to take place online and it'll be open to the public. We haven't sent out an announcement on this just yet, but further details will be sent through our mailing list, and also it's going to be posted on all of our socials. So just a heads up on that, and we would love for folks to join us at this as well. So with that, we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again, everyone, so much, and looking forward to your participation at our upcoming talks and the workshop as well. So thank you, everyone.